Welcome. Welcome. Welcome to the City Club of Cleveland for the final presentation of the Northeast Ohio Local Food Assessment and Plan. My name is David Pearl, and I've helped to coordinate this special program on behalf of the Cleveland-Cuyahoga County Food Policy Coalition. Before introducing our distinguished speaker, Michael Shuman, I'd like to give you some background information on the study. The assessment and plan was commissioned by the Cleveland Foundation as part of a larger project relating to vacant land use initiatives known as Reimagining Cleveland. The foundation tapped 4 nonprofit organizations to partner together to administer and direct the study: Parkworks, Neighborhood Progress Incorporated, Kent State University's Cleveland Urban Design Collaborative, and the Cleveland-Cuyahoga County Food Policy Coalition. In the early months of this year, these 4 partners selected a consultant team from several proposals that were submitted. The partners were joined in this task by a handful of others, most notably Casey Hoy of the Ag Bio-Industry Cluster, which is a related project assessing the food and farm-related potential of the same 16-county region that has been the focus of the Northeast Ohio Local Food Assessment and Plan. I mention that in part because a critical responsibility of the consultant team was to synthesize the findings of relevant studies and to dovetail with ongoing research in order to create a comprehensive overview of the Northeast Ohio food system and to propose a holistic approach for its advancement. The consultant team includes Mr. Shuman, Leslie Schaller of AceNet, and local food systems expert and advocate Brad Massey. The team has worked very hard to gather recommendations and feedback from stakeholders working at all levels of the food system throughout the region. Over the course of the summer, several sessions were held in Cleveland, Oberlin, and Worcester. Stakeholder feedback was also garnered through a custom-created web platform known as the Northeast Ohio Food Web. Check it out at neofoodweb.org. On the site, you'll be able to soon access the final report, and for now, you can peruse the executive summary. The consultant team and nonprofit partners also met directly with leadership from area hospitals, as well as city, state, and national officials. These special sessions were coordinated by Councilman Simperman, who also, by the way, hatched the idea to hold this presentation here at the City Club, which I think is a fine idea. On behalf of the consultants and partners, we would like to extend our sincere thanks to all of you out there who helped participate in these sessions and meetings. This study would not have been possible without you. This past Saturday, the consultant team presented their wide-ranging findings and recommendations in 4 sessions at CSU's Levin College of Urban Affairs. Today, Michael Shuman will focus on the potential for local foods to spur job creation and the public policy implications of this strategy. Mr. Shuman is a Stanford-educated economist and attorney who is presently the Research and Economic Development Director of BALI, the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies. He has authored several books, most notably Going Local and The Small Mart Revolution, How Local Businesses Are Beating the Global Competition. Mr. Shuman is based in Washington, D.C., and is presently working on a new book about the value of local investing. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Shuman.
Well, thank you, David, for that lovely introduction, and thank all of you for coming today. Fairly or not, outsiders see places through symbols. And for me and much of the world, the symbol of Cleveland has been the actor Drew Carey. As Carey says about himself, as you know, I am from Cleveland, Ohio. I love Cleveland, Ohio. I based my whole career on being from Cleveland, Ohio. Heavy, bespectacled, audacious, irreverent, and nearly dead. He says, quote, "I always thought I was going to die before I was 60. My father died of a heart attack in his 40s. I'm not an idiot. The writing was on the wall." And if you've seen Carey lately, you know that he has lost almost 100 pounds and is now a walking, talking spokesperson for the importance of local, healthy, fresh food. Parade magazine said, quote, "Ultimately, Carey's most profound triumph can't be seen in the number on a scale or a belt size. Rather, it's the gift of a long and healthy future. And I must say, like your favorite son, the city of Cleveland has also returned from near death, thanks to healthy local food systems. According to the prestigious website Sustain Lane, you are now ranked number 2 in the country for your local food work. They say, quote, Cleveland takes second place in our bake-off with 12 farmers markets and 225 community gardens reported, serving truckloads of fresh food to its population of over 450,000. A nearly 600% increase in total number of farmers markets, and a sizable increase in community gardens since 2006 explain Cleveland's ascent in this rankings category. Now, sitting among us today are the pioneers of this movement, and I think all of you can really be justifiably proud for what you've achieved. But I think it's equally impressive that the architects of this study, who David introduced in detail, were unwilling to let the city rest on its laurels. They hired me, Brad Massey, Leslie Schaller, for a 9-month period to really develop an integrated strategy on how this city, this metro area, could go to the next level. And wisely they said, it's not enough to think about Cuyahoga County. We need to think of a regional integrated approach. So we looked at 16 counties surrounding this area. The 16-county area makes sense because it allows us to connect farms with urban markets, and it allows us to think about elevating the economies of scale of a bunch of food businesses. What we found was remarkable diversity in this region. This city has some of the biggest and most impressive and most creative urban farms in the country. The Stenard Farm, for example, that has a table here, is just an impressive place where dozens of developmentally disabled adults are getting trained and finding meaning in life. In Youngstown, we found an official policy that is developing urban homesteads to try to reclaim the land. In Oberlin, we found dozens of students educated to become the pioneers of the new local food system in this region, and developing all kinds of great new businesses like Full Circle's Fuel and various procurement programs for local institutions. In Worcester, we have a great next-generation farmers market, a storefront open like a regular store where farmers drop off stuff, but they also own the business. Local Roots is a place where farmers can now market their stuff, not quite 24/7, but for the long term, to the 400 consumers who are members there as well. These kinds of innovations and hundreds of others like them, however, have only just scratched the surface of what is possible. What if Cleveland went further and faster? What if Cleveland went 25%, just 25% of the way towards self-reliance over the next decade? What would be the benefits of that? What are the obstacles that stand us behind and make it difficult for us to achieve that? What are the ways that we can get from here to there? Well, the benefits of moving just 25% of the way toward food self-reliance are remarkable. We could generate 27,000 new jobs in this region, enough in theory to re-employ 1 out of 8 people in this region who are currently unemployed. It would mean nearly $1 billion of new wages in the region, $4 billion of new economic output each year, $126 million of new state and local taxes, $133 million of savings from not having to pay so many unemployment benefits, and millions more from relief that doesn't have to be paid in welfare payments. There are a bunch of benefits that are harder to put numbers around. The fiscal health that gets restored both in urban communities that have a stronger tax base and in rural communities that are reviving their farms. There's a new ecotourism that brings thousands of people to Cleveland to experience the Cleveland miracle. There's a new generation of entrepreneurs generated to populate these businesses, what Richard Florida calls the creative economy. There are all kinds of people, capital, businesses that would be interested in coming to this region to be part of this revolution. And increased self-reliance inoculates you against the next horrible thing that happens in the world, whether it's mad cow disease or food-related terrorism or a massive E. coli breakout. Self-reliance is your insurance policy against catastrophe. Still harder to quantify, but equally important, are things like promoting urban farms, promoting rural farms generates water retention, better habitat, reduced pests, better air. It means less carbon released into the environment. It means a reduction of food deserts. And this city, by the way, it is 4.5 times more difficult for most residents to find a grocery store than to find a fast food outlet. And this explains why so many Cleveland residents, especially its most vulnerable, its young, people of color, why those are susceptible to high incidences of diabetes and other forms of health sickness. We've got to turn this around. But think about the benefits. Think about the benefits of transforming neighborhoods of blight and disease into places of entrepreneurship, hope, and health. Now, to get from here to there is not going to be easy. I don't want to oversell this. You can't just sit back and do nothing for this to happen. We have obstacles in terms of the competitiveness of local food. How do we mobilize human capital? How do we get more consumers to buy more local more of the time? Where's the financial capital going to come from? What about land? Even though each of these obstacles is impressive, I believe there's lots we can do to overcome them. For example, competitiveness. Yeah, it's true. A lot of local food is more expensive than the non-local alternatives. But that's because demand is greater than supply. And we have totally ripped out over the years a kind of distributional infrastructure that's necessary for local food to be cost effective. What we know right now is that the mainstream food system has 73 cents of your dollar going to distribution and only 7 cents of that dollar going to the farmer. Reorganizing things locally can bring down those distribution costs and make food cheaper and put more money into the pockets of farmers. We also see local food businesses in this area and frankly worldwide forming peer networks, teaching one another how to be more competitive. The human capital problem is a big one, but we have lots of examples of where existing entrepreneurship programs are successfully training people to become food entrepreneurs and farmers. Consumer mobilization is difficult, but we have lots of examples around the country where literally millions of people have been educated about the benefits of buying local and are now being mobilized to do so. Finance. We estimate that about $1 billion of new capital is going to be needed in order to finance this 25% shift. Sounds like a big number, but let me put it in perspective. $1 billion is 1% of what people in this region have just in savings accounts in their banks. $1 billion is 1/4 of 1% of all of the money we have in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, insurance funds, and pension funds for long-term savings. What about land? It's true that if we were to, say, double the number of farmers in this region and double the amount of land that we're using, which is about 1.7 million acres, we'd never be able to do it in the region of Northeast Ohio. And we can go a little bit of distance with urban farming, 3,500 acres estimated to be possible from vacant lands in Cleveland, But 3,500 acres doesn't get you to more than 1 million acres of land needed. We have to think about how to do food differently. And if we think about how to do food differently, the land becomes less of a problem. For example, we know that the urban inventory of land is much greater than vacant land. A lot of residents want their land to be used for gardens. We know that there's lots of land around commercial buildings, around schools, around the highways, on rooftops. This kind of inventory has yet to be done. We know ways of using land, of bio-intensively using land to generate 10 or 100 times as much output per unit of land than what we see in commodity agriculture right now. According to our friend Casey Hoy at Ohio State, most of the land in this region right now is being used to grow feed for animals internationally. If we reallocated that land to food, we could feed half the people. And that's with current dietary standards. If we were to move to a healthier diet with a little less dependence on meat, all of us here could be fed on the current land. Now, it's possible that the solutions to this 25% shift could come automatically. If, for example, oil prices were suddenly to spike, then there would be a massive transition. But we need the benefits now, and that's why we have to act proactively. Now, many of you received, as you were walking in here, a 2-pager, and if you haven't, grab it on the way out, which has a list of more than 50 policy ideas and other kinds of actions that we recommend. You'll see in this list a special emphasis on rebuilding the distributional infrastructure, kitchen incubators, food hubs that can receive, clean, process, store, and ship food more cost effectively between local growers and local consumers. Shared use facilities that bring down the costs of processing for local food entrepreneurs. But above all, we are mindful that we are in an era where this country and this state in particular have emerged from a horrible financial crisis. Our budgets are in terrible deficit, and so it calls on all of us to do more with less. We all have to be entrepreneurial, even nonprofits, even foundations, even government. And I think there are ways that we can be entrepreneurial with what we call in our study meta-businesses. That is, self-financing business structures that do economic development kinds of activities. For example, to address the challenge of business competitiveness, we could set up procurement cooperatives among local food businesses. To mobilize more consumers to buy locally, we could set up a brokering service like the Oregon Marketplace did in the 1980s that connect one local business to another and then take finder's fees from the new contracts. To address the land problem, we could supplement the existing land banks with a commercial land trust that was able to acquire long-term leases and easements onto land and then sell those out to the community for better use. To solve the investment problem, we could create new institutions that make it easier and cheaper for small businesses to convert into locally tradable stock companies, and then create a local stock exchange that makes it possible for people to start putting their pension funds into local food businesses. To solve the entrepreneurship problem, we could take things like local food incubators, kitchen incubators, and transform those companies into local stock companies, and then basically take 5 or 10% of the shares as the fee for the incubation, sell those out to the community, and then have the finance for the next round of incubation. In terms of public policies, there is a lot that we can do that would cost almost nothing. It just requires smart public policy making. For example, we could reform procurement policies at the state, county, and local levels to take into account the taxes that local businesses pay when you're deciding who should get the bid. We could transform our economic development policies from focusing on what are frankly failed policies of industrial attraction and retention, and to focus instead on high job producing locally owned businesses. We could transform our securities laws with the flick of a pen and make it easier and cheaper for small investors to put their money in small businesses in Ohio. We could transform zoning laws in just this city or just this county and create urban food districts that make it easier for urban farms and processors to set up side by side. We could put a mandate to local health departments to do more to educate the public about the benefits of local food and the problems of obesity and diabetes. We could do more with the public schools to get them to procure locally and to use gardens more effectively as teaching instruments. But perhaps our biggest recommendation, our most important recommendation, if you think of nothing else leaving this room, is to create what we call the Northeast Ohio Food Authority. What we mean is creating an official or quasi-official body that issues bonds, hopefully tax-exempt bonds, that people in this region primarily would buy, and use that money to finance the most leveraging businesses that we can find in the local food economy. Now, what do I mean by the most leverage kinds of businesses? Well, we mean the infrastructure businesses we were talking about before. We mean the meta businesses I was mentioning. We mean clusters of ag businesses that are linked together with, say, biofuel businesses, the kinds of things that the Ag Bio Group has been studying. There are lots of questions that we did not try to resolve about this idea of a food authority. Would it be part of the Port Authority? It could be. Or would it be independent? Would it be an official body? Or would it be something that was standalone, which officials just said this is a good idea? Is it nonprofit? Is it for-profit? Would the bonds be tax exempt or not? There's a lot of questions that need to be resolved, but I think the starting place is to imagine $1 to $5 million to get this thing up and running. Now, where in a cash-strapped environment are you going to find $1 to $5 million? Well, it could come from foundation grants or program-related investments. It could come from a bunch of new markets tax credit funds that exist in this region. It could come from local banks that have to fulfill their Community Reinvestment Act requirements. It could come from, say, 50,000 residents in Northeast Ohio, each buying $100 issues of stock in the company. It could come from state, county, and municipal economic development programs. Now, let me ask you this. If we can get an additional state tax money, $126 million a year, with the 25% shift, doesn't it make sense for public authorities to put on the table $1 to $5 million once to get it started? I believe we are at a really critical point right now. And the question is whether you folks in this room are prepared to go the full distance. It's not going to be easy. You know, Drew Carey, when he was in his dieting craze, he reached a similar point. He lost about 50 pounds. He was halfway to his goal. And he decided, you know what, I'm going to reward myself with an ice cream. Then he had a pizza. Then he had a cupcake. Then he had another pizza. And he started to feel sick. He learned a lesson, and he put a little sticker above his mirror. He said, eating crappy food is not a reward, it's a punishment. And I encourage all of us to put in our public policy mindsets that eating crappy food is not a reward. Look around this room. Almost everyone who is needed to make this 25% shift happen is sitting right here, right now. So frankly, the choice is really here. You have the power to bring 27,000 new jobs to this region and $4 billion of economic growth. You have the capacity, sitting right here in this room, to end the epidemic of obesity and diabetes that's disproportionately afflicting the poorest non-white kids in this city. You have the ability to transform a city once known for a burning river into a city known as the most sustainable city in the world. Pogo said we are confronted by insurmountable opportunities. And I say the next step, my friends, is yours. Thank you very much.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to a special program featuring Michael Shuman, Stanford-educated economist who most recently authored The Small Mart Revolution, How Local Businesses Are Beating the Global Competition. We will return to our speaker momentarily for our traditional City Club questions. We encourage you to formulate your questions now for Mr. Shuman and remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point. We welcome all of you here, especially those who are guests. We hope you will join the City Club and become active in our ongoing civic dialogue. Tomorrow, Wednesday, November 17th, the City Club welcomes Brian Zimmerman, Executive Director of the Cleveland Metro Parks. This Friday, November 19th, the City Club will host Bill Adair, editor of PolitiFact, who will measure the truthfulness of the $3 billion spent on political advertisements in the 2010 election. That's truthfulness, not to be confused with truthiness. If you wish to make reservations or to order a CD or DVD of today's program, please call 1-888-223-6786 or 216-621-0082. Today's program is sponsored by Greystone Properties, a complex of architecturally unique buildings redeveloped as a mixed-use campus. With us today at the head table are Megan Savransky and Bethany Friedlander. Thank you for your support. We're pleased to welcome guests at tables hosted by Allegro Realtor Advisors, the CCBDD Stenard Farm, City of Cleveland Office of Sustainability, the Cleveland Clinic, the Cleveland Foundation, Cleveland State University, Consolidated Graphics Group Incorporated, Cuyahoga Community College, Forest City, Friends of Joe Simperman, Greystone Properties, the George Gunn Foundation, Neighborhood Progress Incorporated, the NRP Group, LLC, Parkworks, Sisters of Charity, Squire Sanders and Dempsey, and University Hospitals. Thank you all for your support. Also with us today are some folks from Civic Commons, which is all about nurturing conversations of consequence about issues of importance to Northeast Ohio. In other words, they're using new media tools and techniques to promote civic engagement that leads to action. They're here at the City Club Forum today because they acknowledge it's one of the many conversations already happening. The Civic Commons videographers will be holding a conversation corner after the event and are looking for 4 to 6 people willing to spend an additional 15 minutes for a smaller recorded conversation that follows up on 1 or 2 issues that came out of this forum. If this is of interest to you, please see Jason Russell or Leah Lockhart after the program. They're in the back here, and you can find them in the lobby afterwards, and they will be set up in the library after that for the interviews. Now we would like to return to Mr. Shuman for a traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphone today is City Club Program Director Carrie Miller and Development Assistant Lucille Barbati. Our first question, please.
I had a question. You said it should be some type of authority okay. I wanted to know, how do we make sure that this authority it stays objectively intelligent, meaning that it doesn't become some centralized planning? And another thing is, where will the intelligence come from, like with the data? Okay.
Right. Well, far be it for me to guarantee that any institution, government or otherwise, will always be intelligent. But let me say this, that one reason I think it would be exciting and interesting to capitalize this, not with just a bunch of economic development gifts, but with 50,000 shareholders in the region, is to provide that level of objective oversight that you're talking about. And let me just say a little bit more slowly this time. The idea is that within a state, you have the power to issue stock that can only be bought or sold within the state. So you keep the ownership local. And I think we could create a stock issue around the authority such that the original holders of the capital in it were residents in the Northeast Ohio region. And that, you might limit the number of shares that anyone who, can hold in order to prevent hoarding and undue influence. And I think that might be a pretty good way of ensuring some degree of democratization of the institution.
I think the movement is toward like ultra local. So, I mean, if you're going to do like the county, a ward, how would you break it down so that it's tackling issues?
Right. So there is absolutely nothing to stand in the way of a smaller unit, even a neighborhood, even a block, undertaking an institution like this. It's just there's a lot of transaction cost, a lot of effort to get it up and running. I mean, my hope is that if we can get a good model running in Cuyahoga County, that the other counties in the 16-county region will follow in their footsteps and do something similar. And I also think that we should try to decentralize this as much as possible. And part of the challenge, even once this institution gets going, part of the challenge is mobilizing people in your own little piece of the city or your own little piece of the county to come forward with the best business plan that influences the most locally owned food businesses in the area.
Hi, my name is Brittany Coffin. I'm a student at Cleveland State University, and I am curious that you said that the city of Cleveland is second in the nation for local foods, urban farms. We have 12 farmers markets here, and a lot of people are taking advantage of that, but most people are not. And these services are already provided, and they, of course, can be provided in a much larger quantity. But how do you propose that we initiate an increased awareness for purchasing local foods, as well as creating a lifestyle change with the people? Because it's a choice to buy fresh food, and it's a choice to buy processed, go to the, a fast food restaurant and things like that. So we do have the resources available, but how do we get people to make that change individually? Thank you.
Well, so the organization that I work for, the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, we have 80 networks in the United States, and most of what we do is exactly what your question is around, which is mobilizing consumers to buy more local more of the time. And we run all kinds of educational campaigns. We let people know the advantages of buying local economically and health and to entrepreneurship and to the environment. And then we try to develop tools that make localization easier for consumers. So I mentioned one of the tools, the Oregon Marketplace, where we put together one local business with another as a way of improving B2B kinds of local transactions. But say your interest was to focus on B2C, businesses to consumers, we could do that through a local debit card or a local gift card. We could do that through local currency systems that are out there. We could also encourage people to connect, businesses to connect more readily with government agencies by setting up brokers that consolidate farmers or consolidate local businesses so they can bid more effectively on municipal or county or state contracts. So there's really a long list of things that can and are being done. The interesting bottom line that I have found is that the more education you undertake, the more consumers buy local. That is, the more information they have, the more they're compelled to act. And I would use that as a reminder as you move forward, that there appears to be no ceiling on the ability to give more information to consumers.
You talked a little bit about the cost model, that it's more expensive to buy local. Do you have any thoughts about offsetting that cost in the short term until demand and supply can fix themselves?
I mean, that's a really interesting question. I think there are a couple of models out there that directly address the equity question. One model is I know that one of your local distribution systems here actually charges a little bit more to well-heeled customers and a little bit less to low-income customers, and so one group is subsidizing the other. So a specific business could step up to the plate and take responsibility for doing that. In the city of Detroit, my friend Orrin Hesterman has a program where he has gotten a fair amount of public and foundation money to do a one-to-one match for every dollar that low-income residents spend at a farmer's market or on consumer-supported agriculture, CSA. And I think getting that kind of program in effect here would be really helpful. Simply making it easier for more people on public assistance to use their debit cards and their other food stamps and other tokens for a variety of local food purposes would be a big step in the right direction.
You mentioned that Cleveland is the #2 city in terms of local foods markets. Can you talk a little bit about the city that's #1? What types of things are they doing that we're not doing specifically, and is there a wide gap?
Well, so #1 is Minneapolis, and frankly, so let's pierce behind this listing here. I mean, this is a magazine trying to find some trendy things, and if I was doing the ranking, I would have put at #1 on the list the state of Vermont, because the state of Vermont has about an order of magnitude more direct buying and selling between farmers and community members than any other state in the country. What I would say is that all of us, including Minneapolis, including Cleveland, are basically in no better than second grade. Okay, we've moved from kindergarten to second grade, and now we have to think about high school and college. Because, I mean, even listening to your questions, you can kind of see some of the limitations out there. We're not reaching all of the lower income communities out there. We're only touching, say, 5 or 10% of the purchases of people at higher levels of income. Maybe it's even a lower percentage than that. So I really think we've got an enormous amount of work ahead of us. And the work has to be done in the private sector, and it has to be done in the public sector. So we really have to think holistically about this. I don't want to overstate how much work has been done. We have a bundle of work ahead of us.
We're all probably aware that minorities are affected, lower income communities, minorities more affected by food deserts, especially in the city of Cleveland. Can you talk about the situation where, okay, the minorities are disparately impacted, however, when you look at this room, it's mostly white people who are interested in changing the local food economy. So could you just talk about how we would engage the minority or lower income communities to be more involved in the process?
Right, well, I think your question, in my view, underscores why you just can't rely on the market standing by itself to solve this problem in the current environment. That we need a lot of market activity, but we also need to supplement that with good philanthropic initiatives and nonprofit initiatives and public policy initiatives. I think that despite the limitations, there is on the ground a lot of good involvement in communities of color in urban farming, and that involvement can be built and expanded, and trying to think about urban farms with a high level of participation of communities of color as training grounds for hundreds, thousands of other people who are going to be farmers or food entrepreneurs within those communities is a way of really spreading this movement. The other place where I think there's a lot we could do in communities of color easily and quickly is in the public schools. This city has a long tradition of fabulous school gardens that sort of shut down a little bit in the 1970s. It's come back a little bit, but it needs to come back a lot. And those gardens can be places of training and education, not just for kids, but for their parents. And we have to get the schools to be buying local food more of the time, and more local food from the local farms. And, you know, once kids are involved in picking the food that they're eating, that's what fundamentally changes their view about what's possible.
We often, oh, there it is. In this region, we're focused a lot on advanced energy and health, and we think of those ideas as an opportunity for higher paying jobs. So in the mix of health and advanced energy, renewable energy, where is local food in that mix, and how do we make the case for local food investments alongside of, you know, battery storage in Northeast Ohio?
Right, you know, it's a great question. And I would look at it this way. There's no place for farmers' incomes to go but up. And so local food offers the opportunity of creating a more efficient distribution infrastructure that allows more money to go into the pockets of farmers. So even though it's not going to be a high-wage job, it'll be a comparative advantage over what you have now. A lot of the other jobs in the local food economy, it's true that some of them are in retail and food service, and those are not very high paying, but a lot of them are in food manufacturing. So those actually could be relatively high paying jobs. And about a third of the 27,000 jobs that you generate are indirect jobs. That is, through consumer expenditures, you increase the local economic multiplier, and there is now increased purchasing across all the economic sectors in the city. So it's a boost to every sector out there, high wage and low wage. So it's, even though you know, superficially it seems like food is a low wage category, there are many high wage impacts that happen as a result of it.
Dr. Terry Ryan, Cuyahoga County Board of Developmental Disabilities, CCBDD Standard Farm. I enjoyed very much your presentation, and I've been reading your work for the past 3 years, and we're so excited about being part of this wonderful group of entrepreneurs in this room. And we want to be a leader, not only for people with developmental disabilities, but the community as a whole. And based upon the need to create some funds for this, I'll commit $25,000 today and pledge that I'll take a motion to my board to generate another $75,000 for some of the initial money that we might want for stocks or shares or whatever this fund is. Because we need to capture the energy, keep moving forward, and not let money be a factor that doesn't allow us to push forward. So thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for all of the work that you and the Stonard Farm do, and that's an incredibly generous offer. Thank you very much for that. 50 from Simperman.
How do we mobilize for the coming battle against factory farms in general? Because they're not going to lay down when this gets the momentum that you're talking about.
My experience is that consumers hold the keys to the kingdom. And I'll say a little bit more about my experience, which is I spent the first, 10 years of my working life working in energy policy. And I was very concerned about big coal and big nuclear plants in those days of the 1970s. And I noticed that there was a lot of protest kind of trying to fight these particular large-scale energy generating stations. And what I noticed at the end of the 10-year period was that what really killed nearly all nuclear plants in this country, and probably will continue to kill them, is their costs and the relative cost of energy alternatives. The consumers were smart enough to choose things that were cheaper. And I think the best thing we can do to fight, or frankly, I wouldn't put it in terms of fight, I would say just outcompete factory farm alternatives, is to provide better value food alternatives and let people know about the better value that they can get. So, winning at the marketplace, I think, is where success can come. And the Achilles heel of the factory farm system is the massive subsidy system that supports it. So you have just elected a governor that has tied himself to the railroad tracks of dismantling subsidies that distort the marketplace. Let's hold him to it in the area of factory farming.
Hi, I'm Ariella Reback, owner of Green Pastures Poultry, and I'm very pleased that my business supplied the chicken today, so I hope everyone enjoyed it. So I'm a local food entrepreneur here in Cleveland. My question or statement to you is, I know that there is a huge need for infrastructure in our food system, and you pointed out one of transportation, which is an incredible issue that I face. But another simple fact is weather. We live in a cold climate, and the way that I raise my chicken is pasture-raised, outdoors, eating exactly as it should, completely outside of the factory farm system. And one of the biggest challenges I have is the seasonality, and how does that play out in such a business that's trying to build the local food economy?
That's great. Yeah, good question. Thank you for doing your chicken work. I once tried to be a chicken entrepreneur too. We might put sweaters on the chicken to deal with the coldness. But in the absence of that, I think you're just right that seasonality is one of the other ways that we match the productive resources of the region more effectively and with more environmental consciousness than ignoring all these seasonal concerns. And it really is a question of educating consumers. I think consumers are beginning to get a sense about what is and what is not in season. Brad and I yesterday spent a few hours at Great Lakes Brewery, and we were impressed that it was an alcohol-free few hours. We rolled up our sleeves and really worked hard. But it was interesting that they said they've stopped serving tomatoes on the winter menu because all the tomatoes they were selling, looked and tasted like wood. So they are enforcing seasonality in their menus as a way of educating their clientele, and hopefully we can get grocery stores and food service people, whether in big medical institutions or in schools, to start doing the same. And I think with that kind of education, the market will shift in that direction.
Andrew Watterson, Chief of Sustainability for the City of Cleveland. Believe it or not, local food movement is not the only effort or movement that is constrained by financing. We have a growing energy efficiency economy here in Cleveland, a renewable energy economy. But I was really intrigued with the sort of local stock exchange model that you were talking about. Are there examples or models that you can cite for us to start to look at to explore that further?
Yes and no. And what I mean by that is that when you unpack the particular pieces of a local stock exchange, there have been developments that have occurred just in the last year that are really going to make it happen. So until about a year ago, if you wanted to do a local stock issue, you would have to go to an attorney to do the direct public offering, and you would probably pay anywhere from $50 to $100 to $150,000 to do the local stock issue. That was a prohibitive cost for most small businesses. The second thing is, once you went through all of that, except for, the big kind of pink slip exchanges, there was no really accessible local exchange where local investors could find these local stock issues. What's changed is that there are some new organizations, new businesses on the block, like Cutting Edge Capital in Oakland, that will do a direct public offering not for $50,000 or $100,000, but for $5,000 or $10,000. That they've really gotten it down to a fill-in-the-blank science. The other development is that in terms of a stock exchange, a company called Mission Markets, based in New York, has received SEC approvals to create a virtual exchange. You could go online now and see the exchange, not for direct public offerings, but for some private offerings. But you can start to visualize what it will look like. And what I should say to you, those of you who are trying to imagine what a local stock exchange would be, think more eBay than E-Trade. That is, a sale might take several weeks to take place. But this is good. We want to slow down the capital markets. We don't want people to be speculating all over the place. We want people to make, longer-term commitments of money into the local economy. So to me, this is one of many virtues of this local stock exchange. Let me also say, in broad terms, half of our economy in this country is local small business, okay? There is a total of $26 trillion that Americans have in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, pension funds, and insurance funds. There is almost none of that money that is going into local small business. That is a huge market failure. Correcting that failure means a $13 trillion shift from the Walmart economy into the local food economy. And when that happens, I think a lot of the things that we're talking about, not just in food, but in energy and the other areas that you're focused on, will be a lot easier.
Hi, thanks for coming. My name is Mansfield Frazier. I see Councilman Zimmerman here, and I'm glad that Mr. Waterson is here, but I don't see any other city officials very much coming to things like this. How do we get more of our city officials involved? Because at the end of the day, land use is always a city function. They love, in Cleveland, they still kind of love saying no.
Well, I want to say in fairness that Councilman Simperman set up a series of extraordinary meetings that we had with other members of, the city cabinet and the mayor and other members of the council. And I think there is interest, there is respect for these views. People have scarce time. But yeah, I would like to see these ideas get in front of the city and the council and other folks on a more regular basis. So we're with you.
Hi, Evan Cooper. I'm going to take an attempt at shifting this discussion a bit. I'm sitting next to a guy who's sort of the tech czar mindset, very much about social media. And I think we need to think about how social media tools, a lot of people probably know the game Farmville, Cafe World. Brad and I actually talked about this probably about a year ago. Getting funding to actually use that to create a marketplace. So first have a core marketplace of electronic connectivity of people. of farmers and producers and consumers, and use it as a fun way to actually educate people on why this is important for them as consumers, and create the demand. And the demand being created is the only thing that matters. If I don't care about local food, it's not going to happen. And then connect us to the venture capital world. So last week I went to the Ohio Venture Association. There's a lot of people that if there's a viable business equation and it makes sense, they have tons of money to spend on it. So how do we shift the discussion to be more of a business-oriented discussion?
Well, I think you raise a very good point, and some of the successes that I've seen around the country with local food are situated in the kinds of uses of local media you're talking about. I mean, for example, I talked about that the typical mainstream distributional infrastructure for food costs about 73 cents on the dollar that the consumer pays. The Oklahoma Food Co-op, which is kind of a internet-based, social media-driven alternative for distribution, doesn't cost 73 cents on the dollar, it costs 18 cents on the dollar. And so that begins to suggest the kinds of economies of scale that we can realize when we think creatively about reorganizing ourselves locally. How do we get the conversation to be focused more on business? I mean, I think that train a new generation of young people to think first and foremost about not how to get the next grant from a foundation and not how to get the next chunk of money from the government, but how to build viable, terrific, exciting local food businesses, and we will have a different conversation.
Today at the City Club, we have been listening to a special program featuring Michael Shuman, lead consultant on the Northeast Ohio Local Food Assessment and Plan. Thank you, Mr. Shuman, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This program is now adjourned.